himself each morning, the other unconsciously poured down the sink like a silent farewell ritual. His moss-green cashmere sweater was still draped over the back of the armchair where he used to read the newspaper, its familiar creases as if he had just stood up. I didn't touch it. Touching it would make it lose his shape, and I wasn't ready for another departure. Our house, now mine, had become a museum of memories. Every picture on the wall, in silver frames I polished daily, was a milestone. The wedding photo from 1985, we were young and filled with a light I would later learn was innocence. The picture of Mark and Sarah as children, disheveled and building sandcastles on the beach. And the final picture, taken on our 40th anniversary. Richard's arm around my shoulder, his smile a little tired, but the look in his eyes as devoted as the first day. That was the Richard I knew. A steadfast man, a devoted father, a husband every woman in the neighborhood secretly envied. He was my anchor. When he passed, I felt my ship drifting aimlessly. So I clung to what he left behind. I arranged his gardening tools in perfect order. I watered the Japanese maple he had planted every Tuesday. I maintained a perfect order, because in that order, I felt he was still here. "You have to keep things tidy, Evelyn," his voice echoed in my memory from some lazy Sunday afternoon when we were gardening together. He laughed, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. A tidy mind needs a tidy space. Back then, I teased him for being a sham philosopher. Now, I saw it as prophecy. Tidiness was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Every item in its right place was an affirmation that my world hadn't completely collapsed. I took a soft cloth and gently wiped the glass of the wedding photo frame. Dust is the enemy of memory. It fades everything. I couldn't let Richard fade. I owed it to him. I owed it to our perfect marriage. In the emptiness of the house, I felt a false peace. The pain was still there, flowing like an underground river, but the surface was calm. I thought, as long as I kept this surface smooth, I would be okay. I thought this was how I honored him, how I kept his legacy intact. But legacies, like underground rivers, always have unexpected tributaries. Sunday arrived with a heavier silence. I decided to break it with a dinner, with the aroma of the herb-roasted chicken Richard loved. I had hoped that a familiar ritual could summon the ghost of the happy family we once were. Mark and Sarah arrived on time, bringing a bottle of wine and smiles that seemed sincere. At first, my hope seemed to be rewarded. We sat around the dining table, where I had carefully set our wedding china, and talked about Richard. "Dad, do you remember the time you burned the ribs to a crisp at Lake Tahoe?" Mark laughed, a real laugh, and for a moment, I saw my 15-year-old son again. "And you still insisted it was smoked marinade." Sarah laughed along, her smile brightening her usually somber face. "I remember Mom saying, 'Well, at least the bears in the forest won't go hungry tonight.'" We raised a toast to him, to the memories. The warmth of the wine and nostalgia spread through the room, and I almost allowed myself to relax. I almost believed they were here for me, for our shared grief. But almost is a vast distance. After the main course was served, Mark put down his fork, wiping his mouth with a decisive gesture. It was the gesture of a man about to enter a meeting. "Mom," he began, his tone skillfully shifting from warm to serious. "Sarah and I have been talking. We're worried about you." I put down my water glass. "Worried? I'm fine, son." "We have to be practical," he said. And the word practical sounded like a verdict. "This house is too big. The taxes, the maintenance. You'll be lonely in such a large space. It's not suitable anymore." The chicken in my mouth suddenly tasted bland. I looked at Sarah, searching for an ally. "Mark, it's too soon," she said, just as I had hoped. "Dad just—" "I'm not saying tomorrow," Mark interrupted. "I'm just saying we need a plan." Sarah bit her lip, looking down at her plate. "But it's true, I worry about you being alone, Mom. The stairs are dangerous in the winter, too." And just like that, they began to discuss my life as if I were a project to be managed. They talked about downsizing, optimizing assets, a fresher start for me. Their words, cloaked in concern, were like bitter pills coated in sugar. They spoke of this house, the house Richard and I had poured our sweat and love into, as if it were a burden, an inventory to be liquidated. They didn't ask what I wanted. They were telling me what I should want. My cocoon, woven from memories and tidiness, was being torn apart. The cold of true loneliness began to seep in. This wasn't the loneliness of a widow. This was the loneliness of a mother, realizing her children saw her as a problem to be solved. "That's enough," I said, my voice low, cutting through Mark's practical flow. Both of them fell silent, surprised by my sudden firmness. "This house is where your father lived his last days. His breath is still in this air. We will not discuss its market value at this dinner table." I looked directly at Mark, "or any other." I stood up, clearing my plate, even though I hadn't finished. Dinner is over. The atmosphere in the room became heavy and awkward. Mark was annoyed. Sarah looked guilty. They hadn't come here to share my sorrow. They came with an agenda. And I, in my naivety, had set the table for them. The silent confrontation with Mark and Sarah left a bitter taste. The house, once a safe haven, now felt like a besieged territory. To regain some sense of control, I decided to do something I had long postponed: clean out the attic, Richard's dusty kingdom. The air in the attic was thick with the smell of time. Old wood, yellowed paper, and a faint scent of cedar from his old chest. A single sunbeam cut through the round window, drawing a hazy circle of light on the wooden floor, making the dust motes dance like tiny souls. I went to the cedar chest where Richard kept his college memorabilia. The lid creaked familiarly as I opened it. Inside was a carefully packed life. A worn-out football team sweater, a yearbook with goofy inscriptions, a few concert tickets. I smiled, touching each item, each a familiar story. But then, as I lifted a stack of yearbooks, my hand brushed against something hard at the bottom of the chest. It was a small, dark brown, leather-bound notebook with no title. It was unlike anything I had ever seen Richard use. He was a man of loose notes and the backs of bills, not of formal diaries. Curious, I sat on the floor, leaning against a stack of old books, and opened the notebook. Richard's handwriting, slanted and strong, greeted me. The first few pages made me smile. He wrote about our first dates, the thrill of proposing to me, the joy of Mark's birth. It was our story. But as I turned to the pages from 1989, a strange name appeared: Catherine. "Catherine has moss-green eyes," he wrote. "She laughs as if she's never known a sad day." My heart skipped a beat. Catherine? I searched my memory, but there was no one by that name in our circle of friends. Maybe an old colleague, I told myself. But the following entries had a different tone, a secret and tormented one. I made a mistake that will follow me forever. Evelyn will never forgive. I can't even forgive myself. This responsibility is mine alone. My hands began to tremble. Responsibility? I flipped through the pages hastily, skipping over notes about work and the children, searching for that name again. And then I found it, near the end, A single page written on an October day just 2 years ago. His handwriting was shakier, no longer as strong. Leo is a man now. I saw his picture online. He has his mother's eyes, but the smile is mine. I owe him the truth, but I'm too much of a coward. I can't shatter the perfect world I've built for Evelyn. She would never understand. The diary fell from my hands, landing on the floor with a dry thud. Leo, sun, perfect world. The words swirled in my head. I couldn't breathe. The sunbeam on the floor seemed to dim. 40 years of living together, 40 years of trust, 40 years of building a love I thought was perfect. It was all a cleverly constructed stage. Richard, my faithful husband, my model father, had another life, another child. I sat there, in the cold attic, among the ruins of a life I never knew. The silence of the house was no longer peace. It was the silence of a colossal lie. And I realized my battle wasn't just with my children. It was with the ghost of the man I loved, and with the truth he had tried so hard to bury. In the days that followed, I lived like a ghost in my own home. The diary was hidden under a pile of bed linens in the closet, but its existence radiated a tangible weight, pressing on the air, warping the memories I once cherished. I looked at Richard's picture on the fireplace and no longer saw my husband. I saw a stranger with familiar eyes, a man who had lived a parallel life right under this roof. The silence was no longer peace. It was an accusation. The initial shock gave way to a cold, strong urge. I couldn't let it be. I couldn't live the rest of my life with unanswered questions. It wasn't curiosity. It was a demand for dignity. I needed to know the truth, not for Richard, but for the woman who had spent 40 years of her life in a story she only knew half of. So I became a detective, a clumsy 65-year-old detective whose only investigative tools were Richard's old laptop and a jumble of vague clues. I started with the name Catherine and the town Pine Ridge. The first few nights were a series of frustrating failures. I typed the names into the search bar with 2 fingers, squinting at the bright screen. There were hundreds, thousands of Catherines in this country, dozens of towns named Pine Ridge. I went through old yearbooks, digitized local news, but the past was too well hidden. At times, exhausted and discouraged, I would close the laptop, telling myself to let the dead rest in peace. But then Mark would call again. "Mom," my son's voice came through, impatient. "I spoke with the realtor again. They have a very good offer. You just need to." I didn't hear the rest of the sentence. The word offer was like a stimulant, dispelling all my hesitation. While I was struggling with the truth of his father's life, he was busy calculating the value of the house. That contrast rekindled the fire in me. "I need time," I lied, my tone deliberately weary. "I'm thinking of visiting Aunt Mary for a few days for a change of scenery." It was the first lie I had told my children in years. It came out of my mouth surprisingly easily, and it brought no guilt. It brought a sense of power. The next morning, I drove towards Pine Ridge, a small town nestled in the hills 2 hours away. The diary, wrapped in a silk scarf, sat on the passenger seat like an unwilling companion. I had no plan. I just drove, hoping that being there would reveal something. I stopped at the local library, an old brick building with that characteristic smell of books. I spent hours flipping through old newspapers on microfilm, my eyes straining. And then, in a small classified ad from a 1989 newspaper, I found it. A name. Catherine Jennings. Please contact the law firm of Miller and Finch regarding a personal matter. My heart seemed to stop. Jennings. That was a last name, a real clue. I quickly searched for the name Catherine Jennings in an old Pine Ridge phone book. Nothing. But there was an entry for Leo Jennings, address on Elm Street. I didn't dare go straight there. Instead, I drove down that street, a quiet street with small houses and white fences. House number 142 had a child's bicycle parked on the porch. I parked at the corner of the street where I could watch without being noticed and waited. As I waited, flashbacks flooded back, but this time they had a different color. Richard's sudden business trip to Chicago that year. Was it to Pine Ridge? His distance after Sarah was born? Was it guilt? I was piecing together my marriage, and the picture that emerged was not the one I had hung on the wall. And then the door of house number 142 opened. A man stepped out, holding a young boy's hand. He was tall, with dark, wavy hair, and when he smiled at his son, I saw Richard. It wasn't a vague resemblance. It was Richard's smile. The smile that had once melted my heart, now on the face of a stranger. I quickly started the car and drove away, my heart pounding in my chest. The secret was no longer a ghost. It was alive. It had a family. And it had my husband's smile. I drove home in a daze, the image of Leo's smile replaying in my mind. Richard's smile. The house greeted me with its familiar silence, but something was different. I was different. I was no longer the woman who had left that morning. I had brought a real ghost back with me. And then I saw it. A sleek silver sedan was parked in my driveway, dwarfing my old car. My heart sank. When I walked in, Mark's voice, confident and smooth, came from the living room. And this living room has a beautiful view of the garden, lots of natural light. We were thinking of replacing the hardwood floors. He was talking to a strange woman, elegantly dressed, holding a tablet. Mark and Sarah stood beside her, looking like a couple showing their own house. When he saw me, Mark wasn't flustered at all. "Ah, Mom's back," he said, his smile never leaving his lips. "Mom, this is Brenda, a friend of mine. She's in real estate. Brenda, this is my mother, Evelyn." Brenda extended her hand, a professional smile on her face. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Evelyn. You have a lovely home. The bones are very solid." I shook her hand, a limp handshake. "So are mine," I replied, my voice cold. Sarah hurried over, trying to smooth things over. "Mom, it's just for a look, no pressure. Brenda is just helping us get a market overview." An overview. They were appraising my life. Brenda, sensing the tension, tried to be charming. "This kitchen has great potential," she said, walking into my kitchen. "Just replace the countertop and repaint the cabinets, and it will look brand new." "It doesn't need to look brand new," I said, my voice even. "It needs to look like the place where my husband drank coffee every morning for 30 years. An awkward silence fell. Brenda looked at Mark, who was glaring at me. Sarah looked at the floor. "Well," Brenda said, her smile gone, "I think I have all the information I need. Thank you for your time." She hurried away, as if the house had just grown teeth and threatened to bite. When the front door closed, I turned to face my 2 children. "What the hell are you doing?" "Don't you understand, Mom?" Mark exploded, his patience gone. "This is the best opportunity. The housing market is at its highest in a decade. We can get a good price. You'll have a nest egg for your retirement. No worries." "I'm not worried," I said, my voice rising, "until you started turning my life into a real estate transaction." "Dad wouldn't want you to struggle here alone," Sarah interjected. her eyes welling up. He would want you to be safe and happy. He would want what's best for you. That sentence, her daring to use her father's memory against me, was the last straw. A cold anger, fueled by the secret I was carrying, rose from deep within me. "Don't," I hissed, and both of them flinched at the new tone in my voice. "Don't you ever use your father against me. You don't know what he wanted. You don't know anything about your father." The stark truth in my words hung in the air, a truth they couldn't possibly understand. They looked at me as if I had just spoken a foreign language. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. But I didn't answer. I looked at my two grown children, the two people I had loved and raised, and I saw strangers. They didn't see a grieving mother. They saw an obstacle, a problem to be solved. An invisible wall had risen between us. On their side were numbers, plans, and an image of a perfect father they clung to. On my side was a shattered secret, a pain I couldn't share, and a newly forged steely resolve. I would not lose this house. Not now. Not when I was the only one who knew it was built on a foundation of both love and lies. The confrontation with Mark and Sarah left me with a cold determination. They had declared war, and I realized I couldn't fight without a weapon. My weapon was the truth, no matter how ugly and painful. That night, I didn't sleep. I returned to the laptop, not with the hesitation of a wife digging into the past, but with the focus of a soldier searching for the enemy's weakness. I retyped the name Leo Jennings and Pine Ridge, but this time I added another detail I remembered from the diary, a passion for woodworking. And then it appeared. Not a social media profile, but an article on a local news site from 3 years ago with the headline, "Local Artisan Leo Jennings Wins Award at Arts and Crafts Fair." A picture accompanied the article. Time seemed to stop. The man in the picture was standing next to a finely carved wooden cabinet. He wore a simple plaid shirt, its sleeves rolled up, revealing strong arms. But I wasn't looking at the cabinet. I was looking at his face. It wasn't just the eyes. It was the high forehead, the way his eyebrows furrowed slightly in concentration, and above all, that confident half smile, the smile I had loved, lived with, and mourned, Richard's smile. I let go of the mouse. My breathing became rapid. He was real. Richard's son was real. Staring at the face on the screen, I felt a whirlwind of chaotic emotions. There was a burning anger at the lie, a sharp pang of betrayal. But mixed in, strangely and inexplicably, was a fragile thread of connection. I was looking at a part of the man I loved, a part that had been taken from me. I knew I couldn't sit still. The digital images were not enough. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The next morning, I lied again. I called Sarah, saying I needed to visit an old friend in a nearby town for the day. Her voice sounded suspicious, but she didn't ask any more questions. Maybe she was too busy with her plan to sell the house. I drove to Pine Ridge, this time with a clear purpose. My heart pounded in my chest. What was I doing? Intruding on the life of a complete stranger? But I couldn't turn back. The article mentioned the name of his shop, the Jennings Woodcraft. I found it easily on the main street, a small shop with a rustic wooden storefront and a hand-carved sign. I didn't go in. Instead, I parked on the other side of the street in the parking lot of a small diner and sat at a table by the window. From here, I could see the entire shop. I waited for almost an hour, stirring a now cold cup of tea. And then I saw him. He stepped out of the shop holding a wooden plank. He set it down, measured it, and then marked it with a pencil. The way he squinted at the cutting line, the way he scratched the back of his neck and thought, it was all Richard. A little later, a woman and a boy of about 7 or 8 came out of a side door. The boy ran to hug Leo's leg. Leo smiled, a radiant smile, and ruffled the child's hair. He bent down, saying something that made the boy giggle. I sat there, stunned, witnessing a happy family scene. Richard's secret family. That boy was Richard's grandson. My grandson. A deep pain, even greater than the betrayal, pierced my heart. Richard hadn't just hidden a son from me, he had hidden an entire family, a life, moments I would never have. I watched the man named Leo lift his son onto his shoulders. The boy laughed loudly, and in that laugh, I heard Mark's laughter as a child. The secret was no longer abstract. It had a form, a sound, a child's laughter. It was living and breathing right before my eyes, just across the street, but in another world. I sat in the cafe, an outsider, looking at the life I should have been a part of. Evelyn sat in the car, her hands clutching the steering wheel, watching Leo laugh and play with his son in the park. Her heart ached with betrayal, yet stirred with the image of a family she never knew. If you were in her shoes, would you have the courage to get out of the car and face the truth? I drove away from Pine Ridge like a fugitive. The image of Leo and his son, 2 strangers carrying Richard's blood, haunted me the entire way home. I couldn't breathe. Every time I inhaled, my chest ached as if 1,000 pieces of broken glass were cutting me from the inside. Back home, the perfect tidiness of everything now mocked me. The happy family photos on the wall looked like carefully framed lies. I walked past them, into Richard's study, and sat in his chair. For the first time, I didn't feel his presence. I only felt the emptiness he left behind, a void much larger than I had ever imagined. I thought about giving up. Maybe Mark and Sarah were right. Maybe I should just sell this house, erase this museum of false memories, and move somewhere without ghosts. I was tired of fighting. I was so tired. Brenda's, the real estate agent's, business card was still on the desk. In a moment of weakness, my hand almost reached for the phone. But that's when they arrived. I heard Mark's car in the driveway, followed by the sound of Sarah's car door closing. They didn't call ahead. They came as if they had the right. I met them in the living room. Mark wasn't alone. With him was a man in a suit holding a briefcase. "Mom," Mark began, his voice cold and decisive, with no trace of pretense. "This is Mr. Peterson, the family lawyer." The family lawyer, a polite term for their lawyer. "We don't want to do this," Mark continued, "but you're giving us no other choice. You're acting erratically. Refusing a good offer for the house is an example." "Erratic?" I repeated, the word tasting sour. "If you don't voluntarily agree to sell," he said, and each word was like a hammer blow to the coffin of my patience, "we will have to petition the court to appoint a conservator for your assets, for your own good." Sarah stood behind her brother, her eyes pleading with me. "It's just to make sure you're safe," she whispered. Safe. Conservatorship. Kind words used to take everything away from me. I felt the ground beneath me give way. Richard's secret was a burden. Now, my children's betrayal was a direct attack. I looked at them, the 2 children I had carried and raised, and I saw that greed had blinded them, turning their mother into an enemy. Despair washed over me. Maybe I should sign whatever they wanted, just to make it all end. I stumbled towards my bedroom. "I need to think," I said, my voice weak. I closed the door, leaned against it, and slid to the floor. The tears I had held back for so long finally broke free. I had lost my husband, and now I was losing my children. Everything I had built, everything I had believed in, was turning to dust. In the midst of the chaos, my eyes fell on the closet. I staggered to my feet, opened it, and pulled the diary from the pile of bed linens. I needed a reason not to surrender. I turned to a page near the end, a page I had skimmed but not really absorbed. "Mark asked me about the business today," Richard wrote. "The boy has Evelyn's sharpness, but my fear of failure. I built all of this, the house, the family, so no one could see the cracks. Sometimes I wonder if the foundation is strong enough." And then I understood. Richard had lived his whole life in fear, trying to build a perfect image to cover his insecurities and mistakes. And now, my own children, Mark and Sarah, were using that false perfect image to destroy me. They weren't protecting their father's legacy, they were protecting a lie. The despair vanished. The tears stopped. In its place was a cold clarity. I couldn't protect both. I couldn't keep Richard's secret and my independence. My children had not given me that choice. If I wanted to keep this house, to keep my life, I had to destroy the lie they worshipped. I stood up, wiping away my tears, swollen eyes, looking pathetic. But inside, a fire had just been lit. I walked out of the room. Mark, Sarah, and the lawyer were still in the living room, waiting for my surrender. But the woman who walked out of the bedroom was no longer the one who had walked in minutes before. They came on a Tuesday afternoon when the sun had turned a faded yellow, dyeing my living room a false nostalgic color. Mark and Sarah weren't alone. With them was Mr. Peterson, the lawyer with the well-groomed silver hair and the smile of someone who believes every problem can be solved with a contract. They didn't sit at the dining table. They turned my living room into a meeting room. Mr. Peterson spread his documents on the oak coffee table, the table that Richard had made with his own hands. "Mrs. Evelyn," he began, his tone both gentle and condescending, "we are here today with the utmost respect to discuss measures to protect you and the family's legacy. Given your current health and mental state, it is not wise for you to continue managing such a large asset." Mark stood beside him, arms crossed, nodding in agreement. "This is what's best for you, Mom. We just want you to be comfortable." I looked at them, at the papers with their clauses and seals, at the familiar faces using love to strip me of my autonomy. Pain, anger, and a strange clarity rose within me. I said nothing. I stood up silently. All eyes were on me, perhaps thinking I was going to get tea or go to my room to cry. Instead, I went to the small cabinet in the corner where I had hidden the diary. I returned, holding the worn leather notebook. I walked to the coffee table and gently placed it on top of Mr. Peterson's legal documents. A small act, but it silenced the room. "Before you talk about the legacy," I said, my voice frighteningly calm, "I think we should all know what it truly consists of." I didn't wait for them to answer. I opened the diary, turning to the marked page. The air in the room grew thick. "June 14, 1989, I began to read, my voice clear. "I made a mistake that will follow me forever. Evelyn will never forgive." "What are you doing, Mom?" Mark roared, trying to regain control. "What is this nonsense?" I looked up at him, my eyes unwavering, and then back down to continue reading. "This responsibility is mine alone. Responsibility to Catherine and to our baby boy." "Stop it!" Sarah screamed, her face pale. "You're making it up." She lunged forward, trying to snatch the notebook, but I held it tight. "This is your father's handwriting," I said, almost in a whisper. "You will hear it all." I turned to the last page. My voice trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of the words I was about to speak. "October 22nd, 2 years ago," I read. "Leo is a man now. I saw his picture online. He has his mother's eyes, but the smile is mine. I owe him the truth, but I'm too much of a coward." I closed the notebook. The snap of the leather cover echoed in the dead silence. Mr. Peterson was the first to break it, coughing, awkwardly gathering his papers as if they had just been contaminated. I think we should postpone this discussion." But Mark heard nothing. He stared at me, his face contorted with anger and confusion. "Why are you bringing this up? To destroy his memory? To keep this damn house?" "No," I replied, and for the first time in weeks, I felt stronger than ever. "I'm bringing it up because it's the truth, and I will not let you, in the name of a lie, drive me out of the very house that was built on that truth." Sarah had burst into tears, her sobs choked and painful. "It can't be. Dad would never." She took the diary from my hands, her eyes scanning the words, and then she collapsed, the truth having struck her down. I looked at my 2 children, one consumed by anger, the other shattered by grief. I looked at the lawyer making a hasty retreat. I had won the battle for the house, but the cost was the collapse of an entire family. This house, this life, is not an asset for you to liquidate. It is the container for all of these truths. And I will not be driven out of it just because you are not brave enough to face the truth of your own father. The truth is out, shattering everything Evelyn and her children believed. Can a broken family be pieced back together from the ashes of lies? Do you believe in second chances? After they left, the house fell into a silence so profound I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The diary still lay on the coffee table, a silent testament to the collapse of a family empire. I didn't feel victorious. I only felt a vast emptiness, the price of speaking the truth. I had saved the house, but it seemed I had lost everything else. The following days passed in a fog of silence. Mark didn't call, neither did Sarah. The house, no longer besieged, felt too large again. I walked from room to room, looking at the pictures, the mementos, and wondering what was real and what was fake. But in that loneliness, a thought began to sprout. There was one other person in this story, another victim of the lie, just like me, Leo. After a week of self-imprisonment in the past, I decided I had to act. I found his shop's phone number again. My hand trembled as I dialed, not knowing what to say. "Jennings Woodcraft." A deep, warm, familiar voice answered. "Excuse me," I began. "May I speak with Mr. Leo Jennings?" "This is he." I took a deep breath. "Mr. Jennings, my name is Evelyn Hale. I was Richard Hale's wife. I think we need to talk." There was a long silence on the other end. I almost thought he would hang up, but then he said just one sentence, his tone surprisingly calm. "Where and when, ma'am?" We met at a small park halfway between our towns, a neutral ground. He came alone, wearing a simple jacket. He had Richard's walk, but his shoulders were heavier. We sat on a long bench overlooking a pond. "My mother told me a little," he began. "She said my father was a good man, but he had another life." "He was a complicated man," I replied, "and he left behind a lot of unresolved issues." I didn't give him the diary. Instead, I told him. I told him about the Richard I knew, about his jokes, his love for his children, our travels. Then I told him about my discovery, the pain and the confusion. Leo listened without interrupting. He didn't demand, he didn't resent. When I finished, he looked out at the pond for a long time. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. "You didn't have to do this. Thank you for letting me know a part of him." We sat there, two strangers connected by the ghost of one man. We didn't talk about money, property, or inheritance. We just talked about a person. And in that moment, I felt the burden on my shoulders lighten a little. When I got home, there was a familiar car parked in front. Sarah. She was sitting on the front steps, huddled, looking small and lost. "Mom," she said as I approached. I sat down next to her. We looked out at the street in silence. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. "I didn't think. I just thought about the house, the money. I turned Dad's memory into something to be bought and sold." I said nothing, just put my hand on her shoulder. Can I see the diary again?" she asked. "I want to understand. I really want to understand." That night, for the first time in weeks, my house was not empty. The two of us, mother and daughter, sat in the living room in the warm yellow light, reading Richard's words together. We cried, we were silent, and we talked. A real conversation, without cliches or calculations. Sarah asked about Catherine, about Leo, and I answered without hiding anything. It was a long, painful night, but as dawn broke, something had changed. The invisible wall between us had crumbled. We were no longer adversaries in a property war. We were just two women trying to piece together the image of the man they both loved. 4 months later, on an October afternoon, as the honey-colored sunlight poured into the garden, I sat on the porch swing. The swing no longer creaked. Mark had come to fix it last weekend, without a word of explanation, just the sound of tools and the diligent silence of a man trying to fix more than just a swing. In the garden, Sarah was with her 2 children, my grandchildren, tending to a few beds of chrysanthemums. She no longer talked about cleaning up or downsizing. Instead, she brought new plants, talking about adding color. The house was being filled with life, not emptied by calculations. I heard the crunch of gravel on the side path. Leo walked into the garden holding a small picture frame. He was no longer a shocking secret. He had become a familiar part of the weekends, a quiet uncle the kids adored, a friend with whom I could share the silence. He handed me the picture frame. "I thought you should see," he said. In the picture was a young woman with moss-green eyes and a radiant smile. Catherine, his mother. I looked at her, not with jealousy, but with a strange empathy. She was also a part of this story, a part that had been hidden for too long. "Thank you," I said, and placed her picture frame next to my teacup. Leo looked off into the distance, where Mark was standing at the edge of the lawn, watching us. He still kept his distance, still struggling with his shattered world, but he came every week. Sometimes he would just stand there for a few minutes and then leave. Sometimes he would go into the kitchen for a bottle of water. That was his way of trying to find his way back. I looked at all of them, Sarah laughing with her children, Leo lost in thought about the past, Mark hesitating at the threshold of the present. My family. It was no longer the perfect picture in a silver frame. It was a real garden with vibrant flowers, weeds that needed pulling, and